This class is about making Isk. You saw the previous one on trading. It was course number 1. This is course number 2. It's about managing multiple businesses. Because what you guys will find out is that there will be quickly after you have started on trading, you will find opportunities to move into other businesses. And the third course after this one, you will find on page 2, is about working with Excel, mercenaries, couriers and others. And the fourth one will be about building titans. Obviously that's only for those who are really have the stamina to sit through 4 of these classes. On page 3 of the document, and I assume you have it all in front of you, you will find the main messages from this class. The first message is that all good things come to an end. That's also immediately bad news for you, because you are not going to hear in this class 1 or 2 opportunities that you can immediately pursue, like in the last class, trading. Trading is relatively simple. Finding other businesses to excel in is much more difficult. And so the first message is you have to hop around running and trying multiple businesses. The second message is about how do you then choose and create a business in which you want to be active. The third message is about the hard stuff. So after you have selected businesses to be in, how do you do it? And I've been extremely brief in that, so I gave just 2 examples, one on manufacturing in high-sec stations and one on research in stations, or better still in POSes. These are not classes where we go into detail. I just give you the highlights of that. If you guys will be interested to know much more about that, I can always add another class on those topics, the how-to topics specifically. And finally, message number 4 is about if you have chosen a good business and you are able to run it and you are successful, how do you then build a large business with it? So those are the main messages. So now let's begin. On page 4, the first problem. And the first problem is that you have selected the business in which you want to be active. Typically, there are always people who mess it up. And the first problem you will face is CCP. And as an example of that is the supercarrier nerve. As you know, I'm quite active in building supercarrier packs, either of capital components or capital component BPCs, but also the supercarriers BPCs themselves. And then CCP came in with a massive nerve, which basically cost me my complete supercarrier business. And if CCP would not have done it, my competitors would have done it. Because in the beginning I was without any competition in this area, but that quickly changed. And now you see the example on the right hand side of page 4, trading in ravens. In the beginning, if you would be manufacturing ravens and selling them, you would make a good profit. By now, though the thing has not been nerfed, given that entry barriers are extremely low, there will be many competitors. So you will find that if you are going into manufacturing, into research, that you will quickly be crowded out. Yes, and we are on page 4. That means, and you will see the example on page 5, that you will have to hop around. And on page 5, what I did is I just gave the examples of the businesses that I've been in and got out of over time. And the timeline starts in 2005 and ends now. And what you will see is that with green is the date, the year that I started with a certain business, and in yellow or orange, you will find the year that I got out. So, for example, I was briefly in mining, I got into trading and I never got out. I went into Tech 2 production, and the year thereafter I got out after suffering some big losses. I got into supercarrier BP packs in 2007. And I got out again in 2010 when CCP changed low sec and 0.0 logistics. Then I got into supercarrier BPCs, and I got out again of those this year because they are on page. We are on page 5. I got out again because then the profits went down. So what you will see basically on this page is it's a complete hopping in and out of individual businesses. So if you want to go beyond trading, if you want to go beyond mining, brace yourself for a life of entering and leaving businesses. So that's page 5. Then how do you then make sure that if good things come to an end, so if a new business starts up and makes a good profit, after some time it's either being nerfed or more competitors move in, what do you do? Now, there's a couple of things you can do about it. The first is to make sure that you gather information. And it's both getting additional information what's going to happen to your business, so if there's any risk of it going down, but also thinking through new options, because if you want to get out of a business, you want to get into another business. So for instance, on page 6 in the first row, you will find an example of a forum thread that I opened where I asked people to come forward with ideas for new businesses. Then second important thing is that if you are in a business and you want to move out and into another business, you need spare capital because you need to buy components, you need to buy BPOs, you might need to build a POS, you might need new characters, whatever the problem is. So you need to have some spare cash. Obviously you don't want to have too much spare cash because that's killing your returns, but a little bit is not does not hurt. And then thirdly, it's extremely important that if you foresee that the business is going down, that you get out in time. And the timing of that is critical. For instance, the example on the right hand of the page is supercarrier BPO copying. I got the timing wrong 3 times in a row. First, when I got out in 2008, which turned out too early, because thereafter prices picked up, but I just sold all my BPOs. That was the second problem in 2009. I purchased BPOs, I researched them, but then I already missed out on the price hike. And then when I got out fall this year, it was again too late because I was selling them. I was selling my Nix BPOs and Aeon BPOs at a reduced price compared to the NPC price that I bought them for. So it's extremely critical that if you think of businesses, that you research it, that you know when it's going down, that you have the spare cash available to build new businesses, and that you get out before others get out. That's the message on those were the messages on page 6. Then we go to page 7. This is about how do you then select the businesses that you want to be in. It's a little bit conceptual or numerical. I don't know if you all appreciate it, but this is how I think of businesses in Eve, and not, by the way, not only on businesses in Eve, but also in real life. What I aim for is on the left-hand side. What you see there is that I aim for capital growth in terms of ESK that I make per year. And how do you get there? Now, the amount of capital that you can grow, the amount of capital you can make, is based on 3 things. First is the amount of capital that you have. And so if you have no capital, likelihood of you making lots of money is low. And because you can't buy BPOs, you can't buy POSes, etc., etc. So you need capital in order to make more capital. Then the second problem comes, which is often overlooked, which is you have to make your capital work for you. And that means that if you have 1 billion ESK, you want to generate revenues 4, 5 times, 6 times that amount per year. And the third thing you want is margin. So if you make revenues out of it, you want that revenue to have as much profit as possible. Now, but before we go to margin, which is on the next page, let's talk a little bit about capital turns. So capital spinning, making sure that you make lots of revenues from the capital that you have available. Because if you choose that right, you can grow much faster than if you make the wrong choice. And to give there are examples below. For instance, the second bullet: buy assets with a short payback. Now, let me give an example of that. You could, for instance, consider investing in BPOs, Tech 2 BPOs. But Tech 2 BPOs have an enormously long payback time. And that is not something that you want. And let me quickly find I can't find it here. There is a thread called EFI.com, and on that website, what you have there is a calculation of the payback of all kind of BPOs, and that's super helpful. I have it here. 1 second, I will copy it in. I hope it's readable, but otherwise just go to EFI.com. I used it when I was looking at the forum threads on which Tech 2 BPOs were being sold. And then if you look at this forum thread, you will find this particular BPO is currently for sale, the Anathema Blueprint. But if you do the calculations, what you will see is that the payback time of that blueprint is something like 5-6 years. And if you then take into account that there's always the risk of a nerf or something else happening, that means that if you invest capital in Tech 2 BPOs, you could probably take 5, 6, 7 years to get your money, to have your money doubled. Now, in real life, that might be great. In EVE, it's just not good enough. And there are many investments where you can have your money doubled in 1 or 2 years. And that is a critical choice if you have that, if you make that choice correctly. So look for opportunities. For instance, when the player-owned customs offices were introduced, I had researched that. I was warned by others. I invested in all the materials that were available to produce those player-owned customs offices up front. I bought the BPCs from a guy, and I pre-arranged that before Crucible was released. So on the day of the release, he sent me 500 of BPCs, and I produced the player-owned customs offices, which went for, at the beginning at least, for a very high profit. I don't know if they still go for a very high profit, because I stopped producing those, but that's maybe an example of how you can make a boatload of money by researching well and moving into a business with a high return and a high capital turn, because all the customs offices that I produced were immediately resold. A third bullet on that same page, page 7, is reinvest profits fast. So obviously that's the inverse of what I explained to you guys on the previous page, in which I said have a little bit of cash capital available to move into new businesses. But the other side is, if you have too much capital laying around, obviously it doesn't make any returns, and therefore your capital does not grow. So page 7, basically, if you take one message away from it, is think real hard about your businesses that you move into, to what extent they provide multiple turns on your capital each year. Otherwise, it's going to take a very long time for you to earn your money back. Then let's go to page 8. Page 8 talks about the third point, the margins. So how do you create businesses that have high amounts of margin, so lots of profit per ESK revenue? Now, the way to think about that is that you don't follow the crowd, and that is the Raven example. Producing ravens is not very smart, because you will have very low margins. So think of businesses where you can make an outrageous margin. And I gave 4 methods of doing that. The first method is create trust. And I think Kriba is a great example of that. This guy earned his Titan fleet by creating trust. Darkness is another guy that's building on trust, and there's many more. There's also others who make money on misguided trust, like the guys who are starting banks in Ponzi schemes and the like. Now, that is method number 1 of creating entry barriers, because you cannot easily replicate trust. Method number 2 is capital. The business that I'm in, Supercarriers and Titan BPO copying and Titan BPC packs, is very difficult to get in because you need enormous amount of capital, and that will make sure that other people are threatened away from this one. Now, I assume that this is not something you can replicate the day or tomorrow, but just keep it in mind for the future. The third one is access. For instance, to produce ships, say you want to produce dreadnoughts or supercarriers, you need to be, you get into low sec, and flying with freighters into low sec is typically not a very safe thing to do. So let alone flying with jump freighters into 0.0 to produce Titans. So access is important. And then sometimes complexity is a way to make sure that people stay away from your business. Sommerblink is a great example of that. They created a very thriving business, but again, it's not easy to copy this business. And that means that all those type of businesses that are on this page makes lots of money, lots of margins, because there are high entry barriers. Am I clear until now? Are there already questions you guys want to pose? Good. You can shoot questions in the in-game channel, and if there's anything you want to know whilst I'm talking. But anyway, so this section, so that I just talked about, basically says make sure that you think about businesses where you have a high capital turn. Make sure that you get out in time before your assets are going down the drain. And if you get into new ones, make sure you select them in such a way that they will provide you with high margins. Now, if you've done all of that, then you get to the hard work, which are on page 9 and 10. By the way, there's there's a question by Kalen. Are there new opportunities made by the growth of money made by incursions? I honestly don't know, Kalen. It's not an opportunity that I've explored. What you guys might want to do is search in eForums under my name to this forum thread, of which I made a copy in the presentation, which is called Ideas for a 300 billion ESK business. So I invited a lot of people in-game to provide me with ideas about new businesses. There you will find potentially interesting ideas also for you guys. Then the hard work. And I gave 2 examples of the hard work. The first is on page 9. That's on manufacturing in stations. And I selected that one because I assume that many of you, when you are moving into new businesses, that manufacturing will be a logical one to try. Now, and I try to explain it in as simple terms as possible, because indeed it is relatively simple. What you will see on page 9 is the explanation. And it works roughly as this. Buy a BPO. It can also be a BPC that you buy, but normally you would buy a BPO. Then research the BPO. Why would you research a BPO? The reason that you research a BPO is that if you start with a fresh BPO, the material level and the production efficiency levels are 0. Material level is important because if you train that one up, you will require less materials to produce an item, and therefore you make higher profits. And production level is important because the higher it is, the faster you produce. So the material level makes sure that your margins go up, and the production level makes sure that your capital turns go up. You make more of the stuff. Then if you've researched the BPO, and the example of the researching I sketched on page 9 in the picture on the top right. So you basically select the BPO, you right click it, you select then the activity you want to do, material research or production efficiency research, and then you act on the you take care of that. There's maybe one point to make about researching, which is that typically in stations there are very long queues for you to use the station research slots. Therefore, I always research my BPOs in a POS, because if you build your own POS and if you have laboratories in those POSes, you can immediately start researching. So the question of Andy, he asked, how long does it take to research these BPOs to acceptable levels? Now, what you will typically find in stations is that there is already 20 to 30 days of a queue for researching your BPOs, but after you're through that queue, either because you just patiently waited or because you have a POS available of your own, then it is typically not too long. To give an example, when I researched my capital construction BPOs, I researched them to ME 30, material level 30, which takes 16 days, and to production level 10, which takes 8 or 9 days. There's a question of Malcolm. Can a POS be built in HiSec, and how much do they cost? You can build them in HiSec in 0.5 until 0.7 level. 0.8, 9 and 10 you can't build POSes. The cost of a POS varies. So if I set up a POS, I typically set up a large faction POS with lots of defense, because I don't want my Titan BPOs, the copies that I'm running, to be destroyed by mercenaries. Or 0.0 alliances, and therefore they cost me up to 3 billion a piece. But if you buy a small POS and you just online it with a couple of laboratories, likelihood that you will survive is quite high, and then it's only a couple of 100 million. Now, I say only, but it's still obviously a lot of money. Now, after you researched your BPO, you can start producing. First step there is you buy the stuff, and to understand how much you need of it, you have to click on your BPO, and to see how much you have to look at the bill of materials. And in the bill of materials, you will see the amount you need. And in my next course, number 4, I will talk about using Excel spreadsheets, because the amount you really need depends on your material level and also on your own skills. But I will talk about that in the next course in detail, how you build a spreadsheet to calculate in detail how much material you need. But a first proxy of how much you need is in the bill of materials of your BPO. After you bought some stuff, which you could do at places like Yita, you have to obviously courier it to your freighter it to your production location. And in your production station, you put it in your corporate hangar bay, and then from that moment on, you can start using it for production. And that is explained in step 5, where you will see in my corporate hangar bay, I have those capital drone bay blueprints, and I right-click them, I press on manufacturing, and then it asks me where I want to have them produced. I have to select a factory slot in my station, and factory slots, manufacturing slots in stations are typically free or have a very short queue of maybe a couple of hours or maximum a day. And then you have to fill in the number of items you want to produce, say 1, 5, 100, and you set off the run. The maximum length of the run is a month. It can never be longer than 30 or 31 days. What I've also done on this page is highlighted the skills, the main skills you need for manufacturing. You see them at the bottom. Mass production is an advanced mass production will help you to set off multiple production runs. So with mass production 5 you can set off 6 runs, and if you trained it up to advanced mass production 5 you can set off to 11 runs. So 11 different BPOs that you have manufacturing in parallel. Production efficiency is super important because that reduces time it takes to produce. So that's again important for your capital turns. And then you need some form of construction skill. In this case, for instance, for the BPO you saw here, the capital drone blade blueprint, you need capital ship production 1. And if you then want to produce, for instance, Titans, you need capital ship production 5. Alan, you corrected me. Thanks for that. Production efficiency indeed reduces materials, not time. Then there's a couple of other skills and implants that come handy. Cybernetics 5 comes handy because it allows you to use certain implants, and the implant that I always use is a hardwiring F60 implant. So if you type in F60 in the search window under the market, you will find that implant. Maybe, Ellen, you also know why it helps. I forgot whether that reduces time or it reduces material uses, one of the two. But it turns out to be a pretty handy BPO. And there are slightly less expensive versions of that. F40 and F60, F50, less expensive, but still very handy. Now, Ellen, thank you for the information. So F60 reduces time, and that goes back again to the story that I just told, which is the story on page 7, where I explained how I think about having my capital grow, where the second step is capital turns. So the more you can produce with your BPO, the faster your income grows, and that's why it is so important to use implants like hardwiring at 40, 50 or 60, and to have production efficiency at level 5. It's not strictly needed, but it will help you make more money. And yes, Ellen, you're right that there are also implants to reduce research time. We will get to that on the next page. So that is in a nutshell how production works. And at the end of your after the time has finished, what you will do is you go to the left-hand side of your screen. There's a button called Science and Industry. If you click on that, a tab opens called Science and Industry, and then you have two options under Jobs. There is activity, state, range, and owner. Now, depending on whether you have set off the runs from your item, your personal hangar, you have to select Me and then say Get Jobs. Or if you set them off from your corporate hangar bay, the corporate bay, you have to select as an owner corporate and then Get Jobs. After you've done that, you will see with a green color those jobs that have finished, and you can select them and press Deliver. And then they will be delivered into either your corporate hangar bay or your own hangar bay, depending on where you started them from. Your BPOs will then also be available again, and you can set off the next run. So that's basically how it works. Any questions on that? If not, then I will continue to the next part, which is page 10. There we talk about another form of industrial work, which is researching BPOs. How that works is as follows, and that's, as you understand, is my main business. So in the past I produced mainly capital components for Titans and supercarriers that were then shipped by others into 0.0. But then logistics changed and I moved from manufacturing capital components to copying the BPOs of the capital components, so that people could take my capital components, combine them with compressed minerals and ship them off to 0.0 in jump fighters. So just as an example of how I switched from one business to the next. And I'm now indeed on page 10. Now, how does that work? So if you want to copy BPOs, it starts again with completely the same way as how it works with manufacturing BPOs. You have to buy them, you have to research them. And I will not go into that because that's exactly the same as on the previous page, page 9. But thereafter, you have to start copying those BPOs. And copying BPOs requires a POS. And without a POS, it is extremely difficult for the reason that I highlighted earlier, which is that in stations there are research slots available, but they tend to be fully occupied by others. And for this reason, I have built my own POSes. In this training, I'm not going to talk about how you build a POS. I believe that there's another course on that also, and how do you build and how do you fit a POS. If there's demand for that, I can obviously do that, but for the moment I just assume that you know how to do it or that somebody else can explain it to you. But say that you have built a POS in a certain system, and that in that POS you have laboratories. You have two types of laboratories. You have normal laboratories and you have advanced laboratories. Advanced laboratories are a little bit more expensive, but they contain more research and production slots. Now, if you have advanced laboratories, they have 3 research slots. Now, you can check it out yourself on the market by looking at those items. But you have 3 research slots, copy slots per lab. You can have somewhere from 10, 11 laboratories per POS. Thank you, Jort. That's indeed the normal laboratory. You can have 10 or 11 of those, depending on the size of your POS. And so in total, you can have something like 20 or 30 research slots in a POS. So what do you do then next? So you're in your station, and now you have to take your BPOs and you have to move them into your corporate hangar bay. And you cannot produce in your POS from your own item bay. So you move your BPOs into the corporate hangar bay, and there you can set off copy runs. And that works again a little bit the same as you saw on the previous page with manufacturing. The picture is now on page 10 on the bottom right. And what you see here is I have right-clicked a BPO, I've selected copying, then it asks me where do I want to copy. I have then to select corporate. I have to select not just my station but the whole system, and based on that I can select a free slot and set off a run. After the runs have completed, which is typically after 10 days, 30 days, depending a little bit on how large a run you have set, like I explained with manufacturing, you have to deliver them. And so again, go to Science and Industry, select jobs, find your jobs, select them and press deliver. And then the BPCs are delivered in your POSes. They are in the laboratories. So you have to take your shuttle or whatever instrument you have available, and you fly to your POS. And in those laboratories, if you right-click them, you can find the BPCs that you have set off a couple of days or a month earlier. You put them in your cargo bay and you fly them back into your station. And the BPOs have never left the station. The BPOs you can still find after you have completed the run. You can find them in your corporate hangar bay. So that's the way to to do research in POSes, and it can be either, I've now given the example of copying BPOs. You can use the same method also for material research, and you can use the same method also for production efficiency research. The skills are on the bottom of page 10. You will see similar skills as you've seen on the previous page, on page 9. That was for manufacturing. So again, you will see cybernetics. You will see a implant. In this case, it's not the F60. It's the K numbers, K40, K50, K60. Again, progressively strong, but also progressively important. You need scientific networking 1. Why? You don't need it if you copy in a POS, in a station, but if you copy in a POS, you need scientific networking 1, otherwise you don't have the range. Then, like with manufacturing, you need a skill called, in this case, laboratory operations, or even advanced laboratory operations, to increase the number of BPOs that you can copy in parallel. And so with advanced laboratory operations 5, you can copy or research 11 BPOs in parallel. So I've trained all my characters to advanced laboratory operations 5. So that is how the research process in POSes works. Then there's a question from Bowl of Milk. If you instill a BPO from a station and the POS is destroyed, the BPO returns to the station. Yes, that's also my understanding. Luckily, it has never happened to me, but my BPO I put it into my corporate hangar bay, and it stays there. It did not. So I did not put it in the POS. I did not even try to put it in a POS. Maybe you can put also BPOs in a POS, but I think it's highly risky. The beauty of this is that you can research, copy or research BPOs without running any risk of them, your most valuable assets, to be destroyed. So that's how research in POSes works. Then we go already to the last page, which is managing growth by managing your bottlenecks. And that's a story that I also told when I was talking about trading last week. When I talked about trading, I was also talking about bottlenecks, and there the bottlenecks were things like skills and number of characters, capital, and the like. But if you run multiple businesses, you have a similar problem. And that's on page 11. And what you see on page 11 is first on the left-hand side, the cover of a book that some of you might enjoy. It's one of the 2 business books that I've read in my whole life. This is called The Goal, and it's about working with constraints. And that is something that you will find if you pursue an industrial career, is that you will have many constraints that you have to stay within. Now, and I've listed here the 3 biggest ones that I'm struggling with on a day-to-day basis. The first is my characters. And as I explained before, when you manufacture or when you do research, you can have, depending on whether you have advanced manufacturing 5 trained or advanced laboratory operations 5, you can have up to 11 copy or manufacturing slots that you can use in parallel. Interestingly, if you have 1 character and you have trained them for 11 research slots and for 11 manufacturing slots, you can do both at the same time. So you can manufacture whilst you're also doing research. And then another thing about your characters is on the point of access. I talked about that earlier. So if you want to produce, for instance, dreads or carriers in 0.4, you need in some form or fashion to be able to get your stuff safely to an 0.4 station. And one of the things that happened to me a couple of years ago when I was in dread and in carrier production is that my carriers got shot up quite regularly, and I lost all kind of very expensive gear. Not only I said carrier, I mean freighter. My freighters were shot up, including also the components that I was shipping with them. So having some solid relations and friends that can help you doesn't hurt. So that's constraint number 1 that you have to deal with. Constraint number 2 is your industrial assets, and there's many there. For instance, I explained about copying in POSes, researching in POSes, and so a logical bottleneck is how many POSes do you have? What is your research capacity? If you don't have any, you are forced to use research capacity in stations, and that's extremely constrained. And so if you have POSes, you have more capacity. But as I explained, in a large POS, I can have maximum 11 advanced laboratories times 3 research slots, copy slots, meaning 33 copy slots per large POS. And obviously, if you have a small POS, less laboratories, less copy slots. So that's constraint number 1. There's a question here. If you have spare research slots, can you sell the time from them? Yes, that is possible. I did it in the past. I'm not doing that anymore at the moment, because I'm using all my spare slots almost constantly. So don't have any spare slots, but I did sell that in the past. And it's also, the inverse is also true. You can also buy research slots, and those are not too expensive. So there's people who have put up POSes in HiSec from whom you can rent research slots. There's one requirement, which is that you have to be with your corporation in their alliance. So I don't know if E-University is running something like that, and if it doesn't, it's maybe a good idea to start that. I might even be tempted to start that offering as a service for you guys. Maybe a good idea. Let's explore later. Now, another constraint that you have is free station manufacturing slots. And as I explained before, that's typically not too much of an issue. So if you go to a station and if you want to set up a manufacturing run, typically there is always space. It's not too difficult to get space in a station. If you think of a system, there can easily be 3 to 5 stations in which there are manufacturing slots available, and if there are manufacturing slots available in a station, it is something like 50 slots per station, and the queue is typically not longer than a couple of hours or 1 or 2 days. Now, somebody has already posted a link to Eve University POSes, so they are already there, evidently. Thank you for that, Pipu. Now, then the next constraint that you might be facing is the number of research BPOs. And to give an example of that, when the super capital nerve was announced, my bet was that supercarriers would be hit more than Titans, and that the large alliances would still want to fly supercapitals, and therefore would put their money not anymore in supercarriers but in Titans. So the moment it was announced, not even announced, the moment it was talked about, I invested something like 200 billion in capital construction BPOs that are used for capital components that only go into Titans, like capital jump bridges or capital Doomsday or capital clone fed base. And I increased thereby my production capacity for Titan BPC packs to 1.5 per week. It was a bit of a gamble, but it was a gamble that I hoped would work out well, and until now it does work out well. Jurt is asking how much. The amount of capital I invested in that extra was 200 billion. Now that was the second constraint. There's a question here about you did not talk about Tech 2, an invention. Why did you move out of this? Now, that's a question for Amenar. The reason that I moved out of Tech 2 is I had a couple of bad experiences with Tech 2 in the beginning. If you go back in my presentation that I'm now giving to the beginning of my presentation, it's on page 1, you will see that under Stupid Act number 1 and Stupid Act number 5, I lost 70 billion of ISK on Tech 2 BPOs that were blown up. Now, obviously, that's extremely stupid, or got stuck in characters that I had no access to anymore. Plus, the moment that Tech 2 BPOs become available on the market is also typically the moment that people sense that they are going to be nerfed. So they know something more than you do, or I do, and they put them up for sale. They already have a payback of 5-6 years, and then the moment you buy them, they are being nerfed, and then it can be even negative. For instance, there's a guy on forum at the moment who's selling an EOS BPO, and if you go to evi.com and you type in EOS blueprint, you will find that it has a negative payback. So the thing does not even make money. And he's asked, and somebody on forum actually at this moment in time offered 48 billion ISK for it, which is pretty stupid. So that's why I got out of Tech 2. I was tempted recently to get back into Tech 2, but when I'm doing the research, I see 5, 6, 7 years of payback with this nerf risk of the BPOs that are being sold. So I don't think I will get back in. I will try to be more creative, like on one of the previous pages, the page number 8, where I talk about finding businesses that make sustainable high margins. I have to be more creative than that. I've not found my ideas yet on that one, but I hope to soon. Now, and the third bottleneck that you will face is capital. And capital is always a problem, because the more capital you have, the higher your margins can go. For instance, I've just been researching new items that I can trade in. But those items are extremely costly. So trading in them is going to consume more capital because of my buy orders, my sell orders, the spare cash that I have to have laying around in case one of my buy orders hits a seller. And that means that if you pursue an industrial career, you will always be short of capital. Because if all is well, you will have more ideas than you have capital. And I listed on page 11 on the right hand side why you need capital. So you need capital as working capital, for instance cash for buying minerals that you then have to courier to a freighter to your production station. Then you have work in progress, so you push the manufacturing button and you produce something. Still capital is tied up in that. Then you you finalize your manufacturing run, you put in your items up for sale, still no money, and it's only when they're being sold, when they have been sold, that you have your money back. And all that time, the time that you don't have access to that money that you've spent on the basic materials, like the minerals that you've bought in the first place, that's what I call working capital. Then the second thing why you need capital is for investments, like building POSes, buying BPOs and stuff like that. And the third reason you need capital, I also explained before, when we talked about being flexible to find new opportunities. There's been many times that I just invested free capital in, for instance, new POSes or new BPOs, and that immediately thereafter there was a Titan BPO on the market for a low price, or there were other things that I wanted to move into and I did not have the capital. So having some free cash available is extremely important. But again, as I explained before, not too much. So those are the bottlenecks that I'm dealing with. And when we go to the third course, so that's in January, I will also be talking about how to deal with that, especially using spreadsheets. And I saw somebody already say, ouch, spreadsheets. So if you hate spreadsheets, then I would not attend the full course that I'm going to give next time. So the course next time is going to talk about friends, and those friends can be multiple. The next course, by the way, is January 8th. Again, same time, 3 p.m. Eve time. And then we are going to talk about, for instance, how do you work with friends who can do courier work for you? How can you build trusted relationships with them? We're going to talk about using mercenaries, threatening of enemies, which is what they typically are being used for. I had very good but also extremely bad experiences with mercenaries. And I'm going to talk about Excel, and I will do you all a favor, and I will start in that course with the non-Excel bit, and I will end with the Excel bit. So if you hate Excel, you can log out after half an hour. So that concludes this second Making Isk class. So I hope it was useful. Quick summary of the learnings as far as I'm concerned. So number one is, be prepared to hop around, because there is not a business in Eve that will provide you with sustainable profits in the long run. So always be on the lookout for new opportunities and get out of businesses in time before they go down. Second lesson was, make sure that you choose your businesses based on the payback time of your capital and the margin that you make, and don't follow the crowd in that. Be creative. The third lesson was, there's lots of hard work then to be done, and that was the how-tos on manufacturing and research, but those are just two examples: invention, mining, ice mining. There's many other examples of how-tos, and if you're interested, I'm sure we can set up also classes for those, or others might already have them. And the fourth lesson is, be constantly thinking through reducing the number of bottlenecks you have, because bottlenecks stop you from increasing your capital. Those were the main lessons. And then there's a question still in game, is, do you have Office? Oops. No, I don't think that's a question for me, actually. Yes, I do. I have Excel already for quite some time. There's another question. That's from Jurt, what would you consider an acceptable payback time frame on a BPO? Now, for me, that's 1 or 2 years. So payback times of 5, 6, 7 years, I think, are awful. But I'm not sure, Jurt, that I know of a lot of people that have a payback time like that. Any more questions from the group? Okay, there's a suggestion of Ellen of small BPOs that pay back relatively fast. King is asking, Barney is asking how many alts I have. I think I have something like 60 alts. That goes up and down a little bit in time, depends on the on my constraints, my bottlenecks. 60, not 16, 60. Okay, now. Then I would like to thank you all for your interest. Oh, how many accounts you're using? Now, I typically stuff my accounts full of characters, so that would suggest that I have something like 23 accounts. There's another question. Would I consider moving the class by 1 hour to 4 p.m. Eve time? It's absolutely no problem. Oh, there's a nice question. Amanar. What about personal time as a constraint? Amanar, you are completely right. So your own time can be a big constraint, and that's also why I'm using Excel. So I will show you next time how I set up Excel spreadsheets in such a way to save me an enormous amount of time and to manage the complexity of my business, because there's just no way that I can remember when all my research runs and my character, when my manufacturing runs my character, when my fuel has to be redone by POS, etc, etc, etc. So that's why I have timers set up in Excel. So I will talk about that, and that saves a lot of time. There's a question by Captain Arthel. Are you paying all of your accounts out of what you earn in game? Yes, I do. And I also pay them by the proceeds of selling them afterwards. So whilst I'm using them, I'm training them constantly with a very dedicated way of training them for certain skills. And that after I've trained them up to a sellable level, of something like 10, 12 million skill points, I sell them again for a very good price, and that almost pays for the time cards. So I basically don't pay for my characters at all by selling them again. There's a question of Barney. Could you recommend a few BPCs to start with? Low investments, good in turnover. I'm very afraid, Barney, that I don't know the answer to that one. I hope I gave you the insight of how to find them, and is how to think of margins, how to think of capital turns, but I've not recently looked at cheaper BPOs or BPCs to start with, and I would not trust what I know from 5 years ago, because, like I said in the beginning, things go up and down constantly in EVE. There's a question from Patrick. Prior to your own POS, did you use covert op ships to do your own BPO research in low-sec for the shorter waiting periods? Patrick, you evidently know more than I do, because I did not even know that there were shorter waiting periods in low-sec. But my main constraint, like Eminar suggested before, is personal time. So I've always set up my business in such a way to minimize personal time, and one of the critical things in doing that is don't move. So never get out of a station with your trading manufacturing characters. Let other people do the moving stuff from A to B. If there's no further questions, and given that it's now exactly 4 p.m. EVE time, I would like to call it quits. Thank you all for your interest, and the course will be recorded and will be also made available for others. So thank you very much for joining. Bye bye.